Welcome to the church family that is lifting lives through living love, inspiring hope, filling with faith, and transforming our world. These recorded messages are made available so that you might have additional opportunities to stay connected with us and that you might learn and grow in your faith. God bless you as you hear the word today. And now, the message.
Good morning, church friends. My name is Mary Hilton, and today I'll be reading from Luke chapter 16, verses 1 through 9. Jesus told his disciples, "There was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, 'What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be a manager any longer.' The manager said to himself, 'What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses.' So he called in each of his master's debtors. He asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' 900 gallons of olive oil,' he replied. The manager told him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Then he asked the second, 'How much do you owe?' 1,000 bushels of wheat,' he replied. He told him, 'Take your bill and make it 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings.' May the Lord add his blessing to the reading of these words."
Well, let me just take a quick moment to echo what Perry just said and say, welcome, Travis. We are so excited to have you on staff. Laura Bruckman, who's our worship director here at the traditional service, she would have loved to have been here to make that announcement personally. Her mother passed away this past week, and we want to keep her in our prayers. But she would have loved to celebrate Travis's permanent installation as our organist here at the church. Travis has filled in many times over the summer, for most of the last month and a half, actually. And so we're so thankful that we're making this permanent and glad you are part of our team. If this is your first Sunday to be joining us, if you weren't here last week, we started a new series called Off the Clock, and we're going to spend the month of August kind of reflecting on the nature of time. If you weren't here last week, there were these little hourglasses that we passed out. They're just 2-minute timers, kind of the same kind of timer that you find in a board game or something. But attached to it is a card, Psalm 90:12, that says, "Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." And our hope is that you'll take this timer and that you'll put it somewhere, that you'll see it constantly remind you, and that you'll use it whenever you need to take a time out and pray, just to flip it over and take 2 minutes to be calm, to be present with God, and to listen to God's voice. And each day we'll send out prompts by Facebook for different groups and people that you can pray for. And so just take 2 minutes and pray. And we want to see kind of what happens as we all kind of consistently give God our time. Now, as we were thinking about this time series, we were talking about all the music that exists in our culture around the issue of time. And one of the songs we thought of, for instance, was the Turn, Turn, Turn from Ecclesiastes 3 that Tracy talked about and that Vandy and Amy sang about. But we came up with a whole list of songs, and so we invited our contemporary praise leader, Frank Bradford, who's going to play a few songs for us. These will kind of take you down memory lane. What we're going to do is I'm just going to say the name of the artist who sang this song. And normally we would make this a fun game where you shout out the name of the song as easy as you know it. But here's what we'll do. Instead of shouting out the name, just raise your hand when you recognize and know the song. The first one comes from Jim Croce.
If I could save time in a bottle, the first thing that I'd like to do is to save every day till eternity passes away. just to spend them with you.
It's kind of hard not to sing along, isn't it? You know, like when you hear this song, I didn't see a lot of hands, but I saw some people swaying with the music. This next one's even harder for me not to sing along. This one, all I have to do is say the name Cher, and you probably already know the song.
If I could turn back time, if I could find a way, I'd take back those words that hurt you, and you'd stay.
I like the end every time, Frank. It's a nice little button on the song. So that was a great song from Cher. Now the third song we had, some of you may not, it kind of depends on what generation you're in, but my generation, this was like the anthem of like high school and college and young adulthood. This song comes from Green Day.
Another turning point, a fork stuck in the road. Time grabs you by the wrist, directs you where you go. So make the best of this test and don't ask why. It's not a question, but a lesson learned in time. It's something unpredictable, but in the end it's right. I hope you had the time of your life.
I said, if I can ever work Green Day into a sermon, if you guys at the earlier service, Jamelyn was here and she had her, phone up in the air with a candle, app going. This is a song. The fourth song that we have, I don't know who sang it actually.
I don't either.
But I know who danced it. Patrick Swayze and Jennifer Grey.
Now I had the time of my life. No, I never felt like this before. Yes, I swear it's the truth, and I owe it all to you. I had the time of my life, owe it all to you.
We stopped before the big run. I don't know if I could have done the full swan move there. Okay, so that was and our last song. We just can't do a song on time and do contemporary songs without playing and hearing a little Cyndi Lauper.
If you're lost, you can look and you will find me time after time. If you fall, I will catch you. I will be waiting time after time, and time after time, time after time.
Thank you, Frank. That's all the songs we're going to do today, but Frank plays all over the town, and you can catch him anytime. So anyways, thank you, Frank, for sharing those songs with us.
You're welcome.
And no doubt you probably are thinking of songs that like, why didn't you play this song? Why didn't you play that song? Because we all have favorite songs that have to do with time. Because throughout time and history, whether it's poets or contemporary musicians, people have written songs, written poems about the nature of time. Because we're all aware that it's this gift, this precious gift that has been given to us, and yet it tends to run through our fingers like sand, and we lose it just as fast as we get it. And so that's what we're going to spend time reflecting on. Last week we talked about the gift of time, and we talked about how God uses time as a platform. There are things that God can teach us and show us slowly unfolding over time that we could never be able to fully grasp in a moment. So God uses time in order to shape our hearts. But today we're going to kind of focus in on the second piece, which is maximizing the moment. So last week we took the grand, span of time. Today we're going to focus in on those like individual grains of sand that are falling through the hourglass, because each one represents a moment. We want to ask the question, how do we maximize the moments that are passing, that we're living? How do we keep them from just passing through our fingers? How do we make them count? Now I want to start with a book that I read a number of years ago called Your Time-Starved Marriage by Les and Leslie Parrott. I was drawn to the book because at the time I felt kind of like time-starved, like our marriage was kind of time-starved. Like a lot of us live life on the go, and we end up giving our least amount of attention, our crumbs, to the core relationships in our lives. And that's kind of mostly what the book is about. But there's a part of the book that I really love that applies to all of us, whether or not we're in a marriage or not. And it's about the idea that we each have different orientations when it comes to time, different ways of understanding and approaching time in our lives. The first distinction they make is between people who are subjective and objective when it comes to time. Those who are subjective, they feel time. Their approach is kind of loose with time. So if you say 3 o'clock, someone who's subjective says 3, well, that means 3-ish. It could be anywhere around there. It's kind of a loose approximation. Or if you say, I'll be ready in 10 minutes. If you're subjective, 10 minutes doesn't mean 10 minutes. 10 minutes just means soon. It could be 10, it could be 20, it could be a half hour, right? Meanwhile, people who are objective towards time, they don't feel time, they know it. They count it and they track it. And so if they say 3 o'clock, 3 o'clock means 3 o'clock, or it probably means 2:55 because they want to be there early to be punctual, right? And if they say 10 minutes, that means 10 minutes or 15 minutes or however long it is, but they are precise on how much time it takes to do whatever it is they need to do. So that's the difference between subjective and objective. Then they kind of make a second distinction they layer on top of that there's a difference between those who are present-oriented and those who are future-oriented when it comes to time. Those who are present-oriented, they live in the moment, and they safeguard the moment. They don't want the worries and concerns of tomorrow to impact, to steal away the present moment for us, because once that moment is gone, you never get it back. But meanwhile, there are other people who are future-oriented, and they say, well, yes, we have to live in the moment, but if you want to get where you want to go in life, if we have a plan and a schedule, and to get there, then that changes the way we use our current moment if we're going to, reach where we want to go in the future, right? And so you have these kind of different orientations. And hopefully you're already thinking about yourself and whether you are subjective or objective, whether you're present or future. But you can put these two things together on a 2x2 grid, and you get 4 different personalities when it comes to time. If we start up in the top left corner, you have accommodators. Accommodators are those who are loose with time and also very present-oriented. And they're called accommodators because they're always accommodating time. They're always making time to try to fit one more thing in, because that's what they always do. They're living in the moment. Meanwhile, if you go down, you have dreamers who are also loose with time, but they aren't present-focused, they are future-focused. So they're always dreaming about the future, but not in a specific, concrete kind of way, like in 5 years or in such and such timeline. No, they're just, someday, wouldn't it be nice to live in this place or to have this home or to have this job someday in the future? Then if you go across to the other side, you get planners, who are like dreamers, kind of living in the future, but they are not wishy-washy about schedule and when. They have a timeline and a plan. We're going to get there at 0500 hours. We're going to get there in 5 years, and they stick to that plan. And then going back up, you have processors. Processors are those who live in the present moment, but they are not loose with time. They're very present and precise with time. So they kind of do one thing at a time. This takes 5 minutes, and then the next 5 minutes, the next 5 minutes. They're very efficient with their use of time, right? Just to give you a sense of like how this plays out with some of our staff, there you see it. I am an accommodator, the king of them, I think. Tracy, our children's director who you saw earlier, is a dreamer. Perry is a processor, and John Elligood, our communications director who made these slides, is a planner. He likes to live into the future. And the point of the book is that it takes all kinds of people in order to kind of make a team, we complement each other. So like if you want to go on a vacation, you better have a planner in your family kind of helping you plan the vacation. Because someone has to set aside the money, and someone has to set aside the time, and someone has to pick a destination and see what there is to do in that destination. Someone has to plan it out. But if you go on vacation, and if you are over-planned, where every second of every day is scripted and scheduled, and you can't even relax because then you need an accommodator, someone who says, slow down, enjoy the moment, we're on vacation. That's the yin and the yang. Or even, in business, it works out in our office, for instance. If you have a meeting, the last thing you want is an accommodator like me running the meeting. Because what I tend to do, and what most accommodators do, is they're like, well, I have this one more thing that I want us to talk about. And they're always doing one more thing. And that one more thing, they'll say, oh, it only takes a few minutes, 5 minutes. It could take like a half hour. But to them, it feels like 5 minutes. And so they're always doing one more thing. What you want, if you're in a meeting, is a processor. In fact, I have Perry run all of our meetings because he keeps us on task and on schedule, and he is efficient as we move through. So the point is that we all complement each other, but that doesn't necessarily make it easy if you're relating to someone who has a different time orientation than you. Ask my wife what it was like to be married to an accommodator. When we first got married, she'd say, when are you coming home from work? And I'd say, oh, in about 10 minutes. And she would watch the clock, like she thought 10 minutes meant 10 minutes, and that just meant I was starting to think about going home. Like I hadn't packed up anything, I wasn't on the road, but like I had to learn to get a little more precise. Or like when we go to Disney World, I am constantly like, can we just do one more thing, because I'm just trying to live in the present moment. And she's like, we have a schedule to keep, and we got to get home at some point, Dave. We can't just live here forever. So anyways, these are all the orientations. I hope you have a little fun later on talking with family and friends. Which one are you? And kind of exploring that differences. But as we think about time orientations, you also see this playing out in Scripture. If you go back to the first century Greek in which the New Testament was written, there are two words, Chronos and Kairos, that each kind of represent different orientations to time. The word Chronos, and both of them are translated time in our Bible, by the way. So you don't necessarily see it when you're reading the Bible, but the underlying Greek has a difference between them. So Chronos is sequential time. And when I say sequential time, what I mean is past, present, future. It's time that moves in a flow, like we talked about last week, like a river, that time is always moving. And in Chronos time, from which we get our word chronological, Chronos time can be measured in seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, whatever it is, we can measure the passing of Chronos time. But then there's another word in Greek for time called kairos. And kairos time is more about the moment, not the minute, but the moment, and specifically the right moment. So a lot of times when you see this word kairos being used, it's like when Paul's saying to the church and he says, at the right time, God sent his son Jesus. That of all the span of history, this was the moment. This was the kairos moment when God sent his son. Or sometimes he says to the church in Ephesians, he says, make the most of the time. And he's not saying make the most of the minutes and the hours and the days. He's saying make the most of this present moment, this kairos moment that God has given you. If Chronos is a river, then kairos is a lake. A moment when time seems to stand still, and we are fully aware of everything that is happening in that moment. Pastor Seth Neckers, who just went on paternity leave, he describes the difference in this way. He says Chronos time is like the countdown of an NBA shot clock, and Kairos time is that moment of perfect release when someone hits the game-winning shot at the end of the game. That's the difference between Chronos and Kairos. And if we live in Kairos time, then we see life not just as a sequence of seconds and minutes and hours, but we see life as a sequence of opportunities. When a friend calls you and they're having a difficult time, that is a Kairos moment. It's an opportunity to be there for someone else. And you don't measure that time. You don't ask yourself, well, how efficient can I be? How many minutes is this going to take? No, you just are present. You don't want to miss that moment because you're only going to get perhaps this chance in this moment in time to be there for someone else. The task with Kairos time is to not let it pass you by. Go back to Ecclesiastes chapter 3. That Tracy talked about in her children's moment and their choir ensemble sang a song about. Even though Ecclesiastes is in the Old Testament and it's written in Hebrew, you still see the same understanding of time being offered here. He says there is a time for everything, a season for every activity under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to tear down, a time to build, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance. It goes on for 5 more verses, giving these same sequences, these couplets of, and the recognition is that different moments call for different kinds of responses. There are moments that call for praise and thanksgiving, but there are also moments that call for grief and lament. Some moments call for decisive action. Some moments call for us to sit back and contemplate before we take action. Some moments call for us to speak. Some moments call for us to remain silent. This is the task of Kairos time, is to recognize what is the moment that we are currently in. And we're not measuring it by length, by quantity. It's about the quality of this moment and what is it asking for us in response. Kairos time recognizes that not every minute is created equal. There are some minutes that are just part of ordinary time. When we're driving around, doing errands, whatever it is, they don't stand out in our memory. But there are some minutes that do stand out. And some of those minutes, some of those moments you can plan for, you can expect them. Like, the first day of school or graduation or marriage or anything that you're kind of looking forward to. Those Kairos moments you can anticipate, but some Kairos moments, they just happen out of the blue when you are least expecting it. God gets your attention and says, wake up in this moment. There's something I need to tell you. There's something you need to do. And when we're living in Kairos time, then we start approaching every interaction, every conversation, every quiet time with God as maybe this is a Kairos moment. Is there something you need to get my attention about right now, oh God? So if we have this understanding of Kairos time, let's bring it into our Bible story today, okay? Which I think is one of the most confusing stories in the New Testament. You got this guy who's a manager, but he is terrible at his job. He is wasteful and he loses money. He can't keep track of where it's going. And so his master decides he's going to fire him. He's going to kick him to the curb. And then this guy, he's like, but I got problems because I have no other skills. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I got too much pride. I'm ashamed to beg, so what am I going to do? So he comes up with a plan, and on the surface of it, it seems like an awful plan. He's going to call in his master's debtors, cut their debt in half so that they will owe him a favor, so that once he is kicked to the curb, that they'll pay, maybe repay him for the kindness he's done. So one guy, he calls in and says, how much do you owe? 800 gallons of oil? I'll make it 400. How much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat? Make it 800. And so when the master finds out, and this is where the story gets really confusing, because you would think when the master finds out what the servant is doing, that he would be incensed, that he would be angry, that he would say, who gave you this right? Who gave you the authority? Get out of here right now. But instead of being angry and judgmental, the master commends the servant. He praises him. He says, well done. What? But listen what he praises him for. He says, the master commended the dishonest manager. Why? Because he had acted shrewdly. And then Jesus goes on to say, for the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of light. What does that word shrewd mean? I think it relates to time. Because the dishonest manager was terrible at his job. He got everything wrong except one thing. He recognized that this opportunity he had as the manager in this job was a limited time opportunity. He recognized it was about to go away and he was going to be on the street. This was a Kairos moment. And he could do something in this moment that would have lasting and eternal consequences. He maximized the moment. And so Jesus summarizes with this moral of the story. He says, I tell you, use worldly wealth meaning temporary, passing away, it won't last forever. Use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves so that when it is gone, because it's gone, then you'll be welcomed into their eternal dwellings. There's a contrast being made between that which is temporary, worthless, not going to last forever, and that which is eternal. And the stuff that is temporary is this world, the money, wealth, even this present moment, it's temporary. But what lasts forever are people, relationships, friendships. And that carries over into eternity, that they may welcome you into their eternal dwellings. The lesson for all of us that I think Jesus is trying to say to us is that all of us have limited moments, limited opportunities. But yet all those opportunities and moments, they carry within them the potential for eternity. They have eternal, lasting consequences. And the question for all of us is, how do we use the limited moments we have in order to shape the story of our lives? Last week I talked about the story of Scripture, and I didn't use the word Chronos, but that's what I was talking about last week, was Chronos time. How God, over the course of the centuries and millennia, unfolded his story in order to help us understand his patience, his love, his character, in ways that we could never understand in a moment. And yet, when you look at the unfolding of God's story, within that story, there are Kairos moments that were decisive, that required decisive action, that changed the shape of the story. When Moses came up against the Red Sea, that was a Kairos moment. Does he give up? Does he turn back? Or does he trust in God? When David faced Goliath, that was a Kairos moment that would set him up for the rest of his life. That would become the defining story of who he was. It's a Kairos moment. His son, Solomon, had a dream in which God gave him the choice. Ask me for anything you want and I'll give it to you. Wealth, fame, whatever it is. And Solomon asked for wisdom. It's a Kairos moment. Jump to the New Testament. The disciple Peter was in the courtyard while Jesus was undergoing trial. And a woman approaches him and says, "Don't I know you? Weren't you with that man?" This is a Kairos moment. And Peter fails it completely. He says, "No, I never knew him." 3 times he denies Christ. Yes, that was a Kairos moment that he failed at, but it was followed up soon after with another Kairos moment when he saw Jesus on the shore and swam into him. And Jesus asked him 3 times, "Simon, do you love me?" And every time Peter said, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you, then feed my sheep." And then that was followed up with another Kairos moment later on in the book of Acts when Peter was dreaming and he woke up because some Gentiles were knocking on his door and said, we serve a master named Cornelius who wants to know about this Jesus that you keep talking about. That's a Kairos moment because Peter's response in that moment changed the course of history, the story of the church. That was the moment when it went from being just a small Jewish movement to a movement that could shape the world. In Hoosiers, which I know isn't in the Bible, but we're Hoosiers, so it might as well be. When Hickory has the last shot and Gene Hackman draws up the play for someone else and Jimmy speaks up and says, what does he say? You guys know he says, "Coach, I'll make it. That is a Kairos moment. To go to Alexander Hamilton, if you know the musical, it's not throwing away our shot. We each have Kairos moments. And the task for every single one of us is to pay attention to the moments and the opportunities that God gives us to have and make eternal impact. Whether that's through lifting up someone who needs a little support, whether it's a moment of conviction and receiving God's grace, whether it's serving the least of these, whether it's supporting a friend, whether it's just cherishing the presence of someone you love. In each and every one of those moments, we have the opportunity to step up, to respond to what God gives us, or to let it pass us by. When I was on vacation in July, I started reading this book called Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership by Ruth Haley Barton. And, I was reading this book on vacation, and I've talked about it a few times on our noon Facebook Live devotions that we have here at the church. But one chapter in particular, the end of the chapter, was called Paying Attention. And the end of the chapter closed with this quote. It said, pay attention to your life, and then it was in italics, as it is being given to you right now. Be very specific about naming the gifts in it and be grateful. And I sat and I thought, what is going on in my life? What is this? How is my life being given to me right now? And I thought about what we're living through. The coronavirus and COVID, the challenges and the blessings involved with that. I thought about the Black Lives Matter movement and the outcry of those who are upset. And I also thought about what's going on in our country politically, that it's an election season, and the great division that exists in our country. And I thought about how that's impacting the church and the challenges that are in front of us as a church. And I thought about all these things, right? What is this moment requiring, asking of me? But I was on vacation too, so I remember thinking about my daughter, how she was about to start high school and what that meant, how there's only a limited number of years I have left. And I thought about my son who's, becoming a man and him playing football for the first time this year. And I thought about my brother and my mom, and I thought about, by the time I kind of really reflected on what this moment was about, I realized I couldn't put it in to one or two words. But I knew that this moment is important. And that how I respond to this moment, that it carries with it a freight of eternity. And I would hazard a guess, and I would say the same is true for each and every one of you. That this moment, right now, God is giving you an opportunity. And I don't know whether that opportunity is to laugh or love or cry or weep or support or care. I just know this moment calls something forth from you. And so I close by asking the same question that I sat on the beach and asked myself. Pay attention to your life as it is being given to you right now. What are the gifts and the challenges in this very moment? And what is this Kairos moment asking of you? May we be shrewd enough to recognize the limited opportunities that God gives us. May we be wise enough to respond to those moments with right words and right actions. May we be faithful enough to do whatever God is asking of us. Because when we are shrewd and wise and faithful, that's what takes these limited moments passing through our fingers like sand. That's what takes those moments and transforms them into the stuff of eternity. Amen.